Nostalgia is a complicated emotion. Wistful, sad, bittersweet. It comes from the Greek words for homecoming and pain. Sometimes in life we experience difficult events that change us forever. Things that throw us headlong into the unfamiliar. Things that we don't necessarily want to revisit, relive, or return to. And yet there is also a strange longing for these times. They are part of what makes us who we are and who we grow up to be. There are also happier memories that aren't sad in and of themselves, but the yearning sets in and calls to us from those happier times, and we feel that they are forever lost. In 1996, my mom and I went into the city to see the public library. It was there while I was doing whatever 5-year-olds do, excitedly telling her things or dawdling around the shelves, that we spotted a peculiar movie cover in the kids section. It featured a large, smiling gray animal holding a red umbrella and bounding along a dirt road with a small girl clinging to its furry stomach, a smaller version of itself holding a sack in the lead, and another small girl chasing behind it. It stood out among everything else, full of vibrant life and color, in a style that must have been unlike any of the other children's cartoons in that department at the time. It was the family feature VHS tape for the 1993 streamlined dub of My Neighbor Totoro. Many years later, sometime around 2007, I applied for a job at a movie theater. As part of the interview, the manager asked me what my favorite movie was. I told her it was Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. She looked at me with a sort of blank look only someone working in customer service can have, and she told me that she had never heard of that film. I mentioned other Ghibli films and she hadn't heard of them either. It's not like Spirited Away had won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature only a few years prior, making it the first and only hand-drawn, non-English language animated film to be bestowed that honor. I'm not bitter or anything. I'm just seething a little. Do you remember your first favorite movie? And I don't just mean a movie that you liked or even really enjoyed. I mean your favorite. Maybe it made you laugh more than you had in your entire life. Maybe it made you cry harder and more deeply than you ever thought you had the capacity to feel. Maybe you watched it and related it to something that you were going through at that time. Or maybe it was the biggest, ugliest, most inane piece of hot garbage you had ever watched, but surrounded by friends making quips, poking jabs, and tearing it to pieces. In that moment, you felt like everything was okay, even if just for a little while. Or maybe it was a Star Wars Holiday Special. I'm not here to judge. Regardless of what it was a film that touched you in such a way that you can't help but smile inside when you think about it. I think everyone has a movie like that. My Neighbor Totoro was my first favorite movie. Actually, on second thought, calling it my favorite might be a gross understatement. How about a new question? Have you ever watched a movie so many times in a row that you begged your mom to borrow it from the local library every other week for a year and a half, just so you could watch it so many times in a row that the tape eventually burned out? Hashtag relatable. Am I right? I suppose that it's no surprise, then, that the first movie I have decided to dedicate a 20-plus minute video essay to is none other than My Neighbor Totoro.
Hey, let's go! Hey, let's go! I'm happy as can be.
These days, my favorite movie changes on a whim, depending on my mood, what's going on in my life, the state of things in the world at large, or sometimes it just is whichever movie I most recently watched. But My Neighbor Totoro deserves a special place of honor among movies that have once been my favorite. Not just because it was my first favorite, but because of how it came to be my first favorite. And of course, it was my first Ghibli, Miyazaki, anime, or foreign film. And it led me to appreciate so many others. But its impact was even more significant than that. It set me upon a new direction in my life. It changed the way I looked at filmmaking as a whole, as well as every other film I watched that came after it. It's what led me to study film in college and made me what those in the biz call, in the most precise and technical of terms, a movie nerd. It was the movie that got me into books and libraries and the feelings that stories can give us. But who cares about books? This is about the talking pictures. Okay, I lied to you before. This essay isn't actually about Totoro. Yeah, I lie. You better get used to that now, because I will do it again. If that's some sort of crime, then slap the handcuffs on me right here and now, Your Honor.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
This is factually fictitious, after all. Not factually factual. But for real, this essay isn't actually about My Neighbor Totoro, so much as it's about nostalgia. It's just, those two things are so tied together for me. And that's how I see nostalgia and how I can explain it. The way it shapes us, makes us, helps us grow, and sometimes even holds us back. But nostalgia isn't specifically about watching movies. It's about returning home. What if the home you find yourself longing to return to isn't a house, but a film? Films you've watched and people you've watched films with. The most religious experience in my life, for lack of better words, was when I visited the Studio Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, Tokyo in May of 2014. It was like a pilgrimage for me, and I actually did walk up mountains to temples. But all things considered from that trip, the biggest spiritual and cultural moment for me was visiting the museum. My world, my small town, had changed from my childhood. And being an American, I fear change. Going to this museum, a new place in a distant land, it's something that didn't represent change for me. It was me returning home, despite being on the other side of the world. I traveled 6,300 miles away from my physical home to return to my spiritual home. That's what Ghibli meant for me. It is no surprise that Totoro is a source of great nostalgia for me, and the lure of nostalgia was explicitly used in marketing. Audiences in 1988 saw a world from their childhood in the 1950s or 60s, an older Japan still in transition. At this time in the 80s, Japan was at the height of its economic miracle. The bubble burst a few years after the film came out. Miyazaki hated how modernization brought out commercialism and materialism and excess in the Japanese people. He longed for a time before this. This is consistent throughout his films, such as Spirited Away. Miyazaki was very critical of the new Japan which was forming, but this movie set in 1958 wasn't directly intended to be about nostalgia for him, so much as it was a reconstruction of his adolescence, in an appeal to remember the values of the old Japan, before the dark times.
Before the Empire.
Before the forests and hills were demolished to make way for wider and taller cities, as we see in Pompoko. Note, you can sing the melody of Totoro with Pompoko instead.
Pompoko, 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 Pompoko.
Thank you, minion. Now get back in your kennel. My beleaguered YouTube partner, Arcturus, everyone.